Jersey, where I went to 8th grade on. And when I was in high school, I was one of 8 black students in a school of 2,000, right? And so what typically happens when I shared that is exactly what happened. Like, oh man, it must have been really tough. And I'm like, oh, it was awful. It really wasn't. It was actually very comfortable because that was what I was used to. What was difficult for me was going into black urban neighborhoods because within minutes, I'd be identified as an imposter. Because they would listen to me and be like, why do you sound white? You're an Oreo cookie, right? I didn't dress like all the black kids I knew. I had a mohawk in my sophomore year of high school. I hated basketball growing up. Right? And I can tell you about rap songs, right? Because I did rap battles, but I can tell you more about Ozzy Osbourne, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, Marilyn Manson, Slipknot, Korn, Five Finger Death Punch, and of course, I'm an 80s kid, Journey. All right, so I can tell you about those things. So my experiences often made me feel very different. And I also grew up with immigrant parents. My parents are from Jamaica. And so my experiences academically were much different than the kids I knew who had my same skin color, right? And so I shared my story, and then afterwards, this one woman, she raised her hand. She was a senior, and she was one of the peer mentors, and she raised her hand and she goes, I have a story of when I felt different, and everyone started laughing at her, including me. I never met her, but we all started laughing at her. Why? Because here's the weird thing. When we talk about differences and diversity, we allow certain people to speak. And then other people, we expect them to be silent. It's not their turn. And she didn't qualify. She didn't qualify as being different enough on the surface because she had blonde hair, blue eyes, attractive, outgoing, thin, preppy, and she belonged to a sorority. So we all judged her, right? Including me. I looked at her and said, you don't know what it's like to be different. And then she goes, when I was in 2nd grade, my teacher pulled me out from class one day, and she stood me in front of the class, and then she began to tie my left hand to my body, and then she forced me to use my right hand, and then she screamed at me at the top of her lungs, it is not normal to be left-handed. You need to change. And then she gets to this final part, what she was saying, and tears just started rolling down her face, and she goes, I wasn't allowed to go out to recess for an entire week with my friends until I learned to write with my right hand. And I thought, wow, she's crying about this experience that happened when she was 7 years old, and she's now 22. But of course, our pain doesn't have that same chronological age. We forget that, though. We somehow think that just because we've grown up and we become adults, that we don't feel some of that same sadness and that pain that was in the formative years. I remember when I was speaking to the students just a little while, like a couple months ago, that when I was speaking to the students here, that the number of students that came up to me after to talk to me, they were talking about things that had happened to them in this town in 2nd grade. It wasn't about like middle school and high school. It was about 2nd and 3rd grade. And I started to realize not only that, but I realized that I was embarrassed when she shared her story because her story it has exactly what I was talking about. She knew exactly what it was like to be different. That I have no right to judge someone's experience based on what they look like. That her story can compare to any of my stories based on how I felt discriminated based on my racial skin. That she knew what it was like to feel different, that something's wrong with you, and you need to change. That's the basic, right? When you strip it all down, that's exactly what my experiences based on race were like when I was growing up. And then I had to realize that the other part about sharing about right-handedness and left-handedness when we have an open discussion is that it's not loaded. None of you right-handed people, when you heard someone left-handed speak, you weren't thinking to yourselves, I hate left-handed people. I don't want them living in my neighborhood because I don't agree with their lifestyle, okay? John, he's left-handed, but he seems normal, right? See, no one says that, but if you strip it away from right-handedness and left-handedness, and you apply it to all those other things of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, height, weight, physical, mental abilities, age, we become territorial. We change our language. We say things like us, them, friend, enemy, who's right, and who's left. And so I started to realize that if I can get people to engage in a conversation that doesn't feel as loaded and maybe make the transition between that conversation and the other stuff that feels more weighted, maybe that's the way we get along a little bit better. And so I want to share, because most of you here are parents, right? Obviously. And so I have a daughter who is 12 years old in the 7th grade. And she gave me one of my brilliant awakenings last year. Last year, 2 days before Halloween, she was sitting in my car, and she had planned to go trick-or-treating with her friend Bryn, and then have a sleepover at Bryn's house. So my daughter says to me, Daddy, Bryn wants to watch Nightmare on Elm Street after we go trick-or-treating. And I was like, oh man. Now, have any of you ever seen Nightmare on Elm Street? Okay. So, rated R movie, horror movie, Freddy Krueger is the villain in that movie. I wasn't concerned because it was rated R or horror movie, okay? Because I'm a movie collector. I'm a serious movie collector. In my personal collection, I have roughly about 3,500 films, okay? So my daughter has grown up with this person that loves movies, loves discussing movies. She's seen things beyond her years. At 8 years old, she would have quickly told you her favorite movie was The Breakfast Club. All right, so my daughter has seen a lot of stuff, but I was concerned because she's also somebody that gets a little bit scared pretty easily, okay? So like 7 months ago, she woke up after having a really bad dream. That's what she said. She had a bad dream, a nightmare. She woke up, she was about to cry. And so I coaxed her to tell me what the dream was about. And she goes, Daddy, I had a dream that I had in-school suspension, so that's my daughter. All right, so I was worried as her dad. Like I said, hey, why don't you choose another movie that's not as scary? And she goes, okay, Dad, no big deal. So the day after Halloween, she comes home and she goes, Daddy, we watched Nightmare on Elm Street. And I was like, Saskia, oh man, I was worried about you watching that movie. Are you okay? You want to talk about it? And she goes, Daddy, it was stupid. I mean, who's going to believe there's going to be a guy that's going to die and come back to life in your dreams and have big claws and then kill you to death? It's ridiculous, Dad. And I said, hold on, that's not fair. When I was growing up, I got scared. All right, and there are a lot of kids that still can get scared by that movie. And she goes, Dad, you grew up in the 1900s. All right, so here's the thing that I realized with my daughter in that moment. Her idea of scary is completely different than my idea of scary. I've never thought about that. Like, I've never considered that scary is different based on who you are, based on the generation in which you live. You see, for me, Nightmare on Elm Street was a scary movie because it was in the heyday of these horror movies that were coming out, right? So in the 80s, these horror movies that were coming out that had these villains like Freddy Krueger, who dies in a fire. He comes back to life in your dreams. He has these big claws. He rips you apart in those dreams and you never wake up. That is scary, okay? My daughter's idea of scary is like your kid's idea of scary. That a lot of them can watch Nightmare on Elm Street right now. I promise you, many of them will start laughing. Why? Because they're generational norms, right? In the back of their heads, they look at it and they're like, seriously, dude? Like, why would anyone want to create Freddy Krueger when all you need to do is go on Facebook Live and watch real people kill each other? So I started to realize that maybe what I do the best is trying just to listen to someone else's perspective and then to be able to somehow communicate my own way of seeing the world without the judgment, without saying that you're too young, that I can't learn from you because you haven't experienced enough in life. Like, I always hated when I was growing up and, you know, my first love, and parents would, and adults would say, oh, you don't really know what love is. Really? I'm telling you, the intensity that I felt, I wish I could feel that sometimes again. Like that intensity of just feeling that passionate about somebody else like that. And when we do, we downplay it like I'm not being mature enough about it. So there are 3 things that I do when I get up on stage. Number 1, that I try to show people that what they see is not always what they think they're seeing. My t-shirt is the metaphor that I use, right? So most of you that can see my t-shirt will read my t-shirt incorrectly the first time around, right? You read my t-shirt and say, what if I told you read the first line wrong? And my t-shirt says, what I if told you read the first line wrong. Right? And see, we read it wrong because we don't see individual words. We see them as groups and clusters. But it's exactly what we do to each other. We're somehow more comfortable summing up people based on group norms than we are understanding who they are individually. I'm not a fan. I think the individual voice is very important, not only for the success of this school or this community, but for the world at large. The second part, what you hear is not always what you think you're hearing. I went out on a date several years ago with this woman from Poland, and she had only been in America. I met her online, and she had only been in America for, 6 months. She had been studying English for only 2 years. Now, English is a tricky language. Do any of you have English as your second or third language? Okay. About how long, do you remember how long it took you to learn English, to feel comfortable speaking? How many? Many years, right? Yeah, so I often hear for 3 to 7 years, some people will say it takes a long time, because English has a lot, we're a language that's built on the idea of borrowing from every other language, but then making up our own rules, right? So you have a word like S-O-U-P, and it's pronounced soup, but you can't follow and apply that rule to C-O-U-P, that's pronounced coup, right? And then I just learned 2 years ago, and I feel embarrassed to say this, I finally learned how to spell the word segue. Like all my life, like I didn't know how to spell the word. I spelled segue as S-E-G-W-A-Y, like some of you. All right, so and then I discovered that segue is S-E-G-U-E. Right? And all my life, I've seen that word in books and magazines and articles, and I did exactly what some of you used to do as well. Quickly gloss over it and mispronounce it as segui. All right, so I realized that English is a tricky language. But I wanted to share that with you because I wanted you to have a level of compassion for this woman, Ksenia from Poland. Because I took her out of this date, but we had one of those types of dates from the moment I picked her up to the moment I dropped her home. We spent the entire date laughing with each other. Which on the surface sounds sweet, but we weren't laughing because anything was funny, we were laughing because we couldn't understand each other. All right, so it was one of those awkward dates where after everything is spoken, it's followed by that. All right, so we did a lot of that. And so I take her to this restaurant called Hula Hands. Have you ever been to Hula Hands? Okay, so it's like a TGIF Fridays, Applebee's type restaurant. So we're in the parking lot. Remember the first date, okay? In the parking lot. We get out of the car, we start heading to the restaurant, and then she makes the date 100 times worse, because she makes it really uncomfortable for me by asking my most dreaded question on first dates. And she looks at me and she smiles and she goes, "Would you like to hold hands?" I hate holding hands on first dates, okay? Okay, so here's what happened. In my house, my parents never held hands. Like I don't have one memory of my parents holding hands. And I also grew up in a religious community, so it was like all this shame about public displays of affection. And so, but I wanted to make a great first impression, so of course I cave in and I'm like, okay. And I reach out, and I grab her hand. As soon as I grab her hand, she gives me a look of horror, and she just starts laughing in this bizarre way, like, I was like, yo, this is a weird thing. All right, so we get in the restaurant, hostess seats us, hands us the menus, and as soon as the menu's in front of me, I start to genuinely crack up. Because on the menu was the name of the restaurant. You remember the name? Hula Hands, right. You see, when we got out of the car, what I heard Ksenia say to me was, "Would you like to hold hands?" That's not what Ksenia said at all. Ksenia, in her broken English, just said, "You like the hula hands?" All right, so here's the thing. Sometimes what you think you're hearing is not what's actually being said or spoken. Now that's important because I do a lot of character-based in my show. So I jump from character to characters, and sometimes that's confusing to people. And they spend a lot of time trying to figure out is that really him, or is that just a character? I want you to let go of that. I will explain the parts that are me later on, but for now I want you to embrace the stories that the characters will share. All right, but the third part that's even more important to me is that I compare myself and how I treat other people and how I want to get to know other people based on Japanese teacups. And so I grew up with teacups in my house that have handles on them. But then I started eating at a lot of sushi restaurants. Every time I go to a sushi restaurant, I order green tea, and it comes over to one of those cups that have no handles. I don't know why. I'm at a sushi restaurant one night, guy brings over green tea in a cup that has no handle. But because I do work on diversity and respecting people's differences, these were the words that came out of my mouth. "What's wrong with your teacups?" All right, because the way we're raised, we think it's the right way. Everyone else is wrong, backwards, upside down. The guy didn't even get offended. He taught me the best lesson in really difficult conversations. Whenever someone asks you a question that has a level of ignorance to it, it's probably best not to get huffed and puffed and offended. He smiled, he laughed a little bit as if he didn't know, and then he threw up his hands, and then he dropped knowledge. He goes, "If it's too hot to hold, it's too hot to drink." You don't need handles on teacups to drink hot tea. You need to figure out if you can drink the hot tea. The best way to tell if you can drink hot tea without burning your mouth is what do your hands say. And so I compare what I love to do when I interact with people based on that Japanese teacup, because I'm not interested in your handles. Your handles are your titles, the color of your skin, the money you make, the vacations you take, the car you drive, the home in which you live. Those are handles. They're descriptors of your life, but they're not the essence inside the cup. The essence inside the cup, I love asking people about their birth story. How many of you were told about your birth, Let me just see. By your parents were told about something about your birth? Okay. Hands out. How many of you have told your children about something about their birth? Okay. Now, I want you to get back with your kids on that story, because when I ask the students in school, there'll be like less than a quarter kids raise their hands. All right? So they have no recollection of them being told anything about their birth. Now, the reason why I think, even because we don't remember, right? So we think it's not that important, but that's not true. There's some of you that had real difficult, pregnancies and real difficulty. The child may have almost died. Like, I've heard stories where, the child talks about the umbilical cord being tied around their neck. They almost died during that. I heard this story a couple months ago where this 8th grade girl was sharing about the day that her mom went into labor with her, that the dad started panicking because he had this tradition he wanted to keep. And the tradition is this, that when the mother goes into labor, the father has to rush out of the hospital and go to a newsstand and purchase one copy of every magazine and newspaper on the shelf and put it away into a lockbox. And when the child gets into their senior year of high school, they get to open that lockbox and read about what was happening in the world on the day they were born. And I was like, wow, that's an awesome story. I've never heard that before. And I said, how many of you are friends with her? And there were like 6 girls that raised their hands. And I said, how many of you have ever heard that story? None of them. I said, well, that's weird. And we don't talk about how we got into the world, but we'll have discussions with our friends and other people about how we think we may exit the world, right? Or ideas of how we may exit the world. And sometimes I go to places where I ask people, what is your birth story? And half the audience will have this as their birth story. They'll say, when I was born, my parents didn't say anything except that I was a mistake. So imagine the people that bring you to the world, what they tell you about your existence in the world is not that you were unplanned or you were a surprise, but that you are a mistake. And then we get shocked that that's the student that eventually just seems to get into trouble a little bit too much. Or the one who suffers with some serious issues of depression and suicidal ideation, or that's the student that gets into fights or disrespects the teachers. It never surprises me when I hear about people's birth stories, sometimes how they see themselves in the world. My birth story, I was born in Queens, New York, okay? I was born in a hospital called St. John's Hospital. The night that I was born, I was the only baby born that night in that hospital. But more significantly, I was the only baby boy born in that hospital for the last 5 months. That's hard to do, okay? 5 months, no boys, all right? So the nurses were happy. They put money together. They bought my mother a gold cross to give to me. I still have that gold cross. But it's what they said to my mom that I've been hearing since about 7 years old. They said, we're not sure what he's going to do in this world, but whatever it is, it's going to be different. You know that made me feel growing up? Like a freak. All right? Like, I didn't want to be different, okay? That was not my intention. Like, different to me meant like in elementary school, like playing at recess by himself, or eating lunch alone in the cafeteria, in middle school and high school. I hated being different. And every time I go home with my mom, I'd be upset because why can my brother make friends and I can't make friends? And she'd be like, oh, son, it's okay, you're born different. So like, I felt like I hated it. But then I started to realize that was my gift. That my best attribute is the fact that I do not think like a lot of people that I know. And then so I get to share with people things they've looked at hundreds of times but they've never turned into another angle and then ask themselves, what do they see? And so this is a poem by Langston Hughes. It's called Still Here. I've been scarred and battered. My hopes the wind done scattered. Snow has frizzed me, sun has baked me. Looks like between them they done tried to make me. Stop laughing, stop loving, stop living, but I don't care. I'm still here. When I was 6 in the 1st grade, there was a boy named Muhammad who was when I was in Queens, and he used to beat me up for 2 weeks straight and just steal my lunch. And then I got tired of it. I went home one night and I was like, Mom, tomorrow when you make my lunch, can you pack 2 lunches into my bag and 2 drink boxes? And my mom never even asked why. She thought I was more hungry. So I go to school the next day, Muhammad comes up to beat me up again. And I go, Muhammad, you don't have to beat me up anymore. I brought you lunch. And for the rest of the school year, you became my best friend. 2 lessons I learned from that experience that I apply into my life today. Number 1, if someone's being cruel to you, if you could figure out how to be kinder, funnier, or weirder, you can get them to stop. You see, with Muhammad, I chose kindness because he expected me to fight him back, and I was not a fighter. So when I brought him a lunch, my kindness was greater than his cruelty. And he stopped beating me up and stealing my lunch, and we became best friends. As I got older though, I took pride in my sense of humor and just being a weird kid. I mean, I was voted as a class individualist in high school, and I didn't know what that meant. Like, I was so proud my senior year. I'm like, class individualist. And then like I go back to my first 10-year reunion, all it meant was like, you were weird. All right, so I took pride in that. And so as kids started picking on me as I was growing up, I was very quick with giving like these awkward compliments to make them stop. And because people hate being given compliments, let alone if it's weird and uncomfortable. And so kids would come up to me and be like, you look like a monkey. And I'd be like, you got beautiful eyes, can I touch them? All right, so I started to realize that if you're able to say something strange enough, you'll be able to get somebody to stop. But the more important thing about Muhammad was that he was mislabeled. He was called the bully and the troublemaker. But he was not the bully or the troublemaker. Muhammad was hungry. He came to school every day without breakfast or lunch. And then when he went home in the afternoons, his parents were working, so we stole his food. Beyond our friendship, the other thing that Muhammad had taught me at 6 years old was how to break into cars. If that's happening at 6 years old, there's a lot going wrong. And so what started happening to me is not only trying to understand people, but I hated getting picked on. I had to figure out a way how not just to use my sense of humor or to feel weird, but I wanted to like understand. So characters for me, why I do shows with multiple characters is because that was my way of telling a story. Not just my own story, but stories that would connect to other people. But see, they're like masks. Each of my characters is like a little piece of a mask. Partly me and partly other people. But a mask, it doesn't matter what a mask looks like. A mask in the end can only be a mask. Yo, what's up? Yo, check this out. See this hoodie I'm wearing? It says Rutgers on it. You know why I'm wearing a Rutgers hoodie? Because this past year I was a red-shirted freshman at Rutgers. I'm on a full-ride scholarship to play football. I plan to be the best running back that Rutgers ever had. So don't ever forget my name. My name is Octavius Furious Malone. Now, I've been playing football since I was 8, and I'm good, okay? I can admit that I'm good. Now, even though I'm good at football and I'm playing in college, I don't care how good I do in college, I don't want to go play professional football. And I know some of you are going to be like, why not? Why would you want to play pro? You get paid. It's not that I don't want to get paid, but I feel for like 3 reasons I don't want to play pro football. Number one, being a black guy who's good at sports, I swear to you, it's the only conversation that a lot of people have with me. Like everybody asks me, like, what do you think about the game? How you doing in football? Nobody ever asked me about my GPA. I'm a straight A student, man. When I was applying to college, I got a full ride scholarship offered by Harvard. I chose to go to Rutgers because I wanted to play D1 football and I wanted to stay in my home state. But nobody ever thinks that. Everybody thinks like, oh, here's the black guy who's good at sports and he's from the hood, so that's what he does. Nah, I'm better than that. I have a lot more to offer than just carrying the football to the end zone. So that's reason number one.